This is a presentation of the Sports Source Digital Network, presented by Hearthside Bank.
Welcome into the Spring Football Show here on the Sports Source Digital Network alongside VFL Ollie Lane. I'm Ryan Callahan of GoVols247.com here talking Tennessee spring practice. And Ollie, this week we've got a scrimmage to discuss. Tennessee's first scrimmage of the spring was held Monday night inside Neyland Stadium. So a lot to break down about that and what we have learned about it so far. While we're here, like and subscribe this channel. Make sure you continue to get this content sent to your feed so you can continue to get great shows like this and everything else throughout the Sports Source Digital Network. So, Ollie, with that being said, let's get right to it. Scrimmages are closed to media. We got to start with that. So we never get to see a thing, not even warm-ups, not stretch. So we don't exactly know what happened. We'll see some plays that Tennessee will send out on its social media channels. You'll get to see a few clips here and there, but that's about the extent of it. So we're kind of at the mercy of what we hear from coaches and what we hear afterward from sources as we kind of gather what we can about the scrimmage. But one thing that did come out of the scrimmage from Josh Heupel's comments even, he acknowledged, hey, a freshman showed up in a big way. Yeah. Travis Smith at wide receiver was maybe not the standout of the scrimmage, but one of the guys who definitely made some plays and had some people talking afterward. I think that's a pretty encouraging sign. He caught a touchdown pass on a fade from Jake Merklinger, working with the second team offense, of course, but on a fade from Merklinger. There was one of only 2 or 3 touchdowns from what I understand in the scrimmage, but one of the guys that Tennessee was hoping would provide some depth at wide receiver, and to see a guy like that showing up in a pretty big way in his first scrimmage a few months out of high school has to be a good sign for this offense.
Oh, it's a great sign. I mean, when you look at it, it's always very impressive when a freshman, especially in their first scrimmage in the spring, does it really well. And so with him also doing really well, but then also in a position of need in the wide receiver room, that they need new guys, new fresh blood to step up and make changes in that room. And I think this is a very promising start for what could be a really good career for Travis moving forward.
And it makes sense that he's the one, if you had to pick one of those freshmen who was likely to make an early impact, he was probably the one that you would point to. He played 7A football in Georgia, big-time football, great competition in the Atlanta area. Has seemed to have a smoother path to making the transition to this level. Redarius Jackson coming from Memphis, a lower level school there, probably had a little more to learn, a little more raw in his game, but even he has had some moments. So those 2 freshmen being on campus, making some plays early on, an encouraging sign. They just don't have a lot of bodies there. 6 scholarship guys at receiver this spring, a 7th in Joakim Dotson, who will be here in the summer. So they need all those guys to be ready because if Travis Smith is the 4th guy, let's face it, he's going to be playing whether they like it or not. And big bodied guy, 6'3", 207. There's a lot to like about his game, so I think that's a pretty big development for Tennessee. We'll talk about the big name. We've got to start here with any scrimmage. The starting quarterback, and Nico Iamaleava, it sounds like had a pretty good night from what we understand. Now, with that being said, I don't think a ton of points were scored. I don't know that, from what I've heard so far, I don't know that the offense just marched up and down the field all night, but it sounds like Nico very in control and understanding the offense maybe more completely than he did a year ago, which makes sense in his second year as a starter. So all that sounds pretty encouraging across the board. Maybe not huge numbers like fans might have liked to see, but if he had that, let's face it, the nature of scrimmages, you'd be worried about the defense if that happened. So pretty encouraging night overall to be hearing that a second-year starting quarterback like that is kind of fully in control.
Yeah, I think it brings a lot of reassurance and confidence to hopefully a lot of the fans. I mean, last year a lot of the topic was how much of the offense are they giving Nico? How much are they really letting him take full reign over? Sounds like now that the offense is Nico's. Nico runs that offense however he wants to, and that's how you want your quarterback to be. I mean, that's how Hendon Hooker ran the offense. I mean, that's how Joe Milton ran the offense to a point. And that's how Nico Iamaleava needs to run the offense to be successful. It's very reassuring that the words complete control and command of the offense were used. I mean, those are really big, descriptive words, but it goes a long way when you're talking about a quarterback. And having that kind of presence, command, and control over your entire unit goes a really long way in making things happen and shake for you in the fall.
And worth noting at this point, from what we heard, it was a pretty smooth night overall for the offense. Now, worth noting that there are a lot more guys projected to be starters who are out there right now for the offense. The defense, a little bit banged up. You don't have Jermod McCoy out there, no Arion Carter, a few defensive linemen missing. So you're a little closer to full strength on the offensive side right now. But that group, pretty clean night in terms of just execution. We don't know if that means tempo necessarily, how much they push the tempo, but a clean night overall, not a lot of balls on the ground, no penalty issues. The quarterback obviously plays a big role in that, as you know.
Yeah, no doubt. And I mean, that's honestly something surprising to hear from a first scrimmage, because normally that first scrimmage, offensively wise, your mechanics are all kind of off,
right.
Ton of penalties, a lot of offsides, different moving parts and stuff. It's nice to hear that they were pretty clean for the most part. I mean, obviously, I don't think the points were scored like they wanted them to, but if you got in the first scrimmage your operations working pretty well for you, then that takes off another load that you have to continue to focus on, and you can start moving to the next pieces of your offense that you normally get to around that second or third week of fall camp. So, I mean, there seems like this offense is already ahead of the game compared to where they've been at in previous years.
I did hear, we'll get into wide receivers here in a second as we bring up these guys. I'll say we didn't necessarily hear that these guys were standouts from the scrimmage, but I want to get your thoughts on what we should take away from the fact that I asked Josh Heupel specifically about Mike Matthews and Braylon Staley, the two, kind of new starters potentially at wide receiver, and his answer was more about the overall progress those guys have made, which kind of made me think maybe not a huge night for them, but also maybe not a huge reason for concern. Anything, knowing Josh Heupel, having played for him, anything you think we can take away from that? And just, is it a concern if those guys didn't maybe catch a lot of balls like we were kind of wanting to hear, we said last week?
Yeah, I mean, vague comments are vague comments. We got to make our interpretations of them. I think foremost, I mean, it obviously shows that they are developing throughout this spring, which is needed because they are the big high key names of that position group. However, probably not their biggest night, and I mean that's okay though, because I mean, like I've said in the past, it's the first scrimmage. Nothing's going to be perfect. You got another one to go before you get to the orange and white game. So I mean, you've got some time to really put it together, figure out what you need to do, and then move forward. I think for them, not as much as a concern, but I am a little concerned to a point, just because of how much we wanted to see them have a big scrimmage that night, and then not really panning it out. It is what it is. I think they're going to continue to push themselves and get better from it. Like Heupel said, they're continuing to improve through the spring. So I'm not at a high concern level. Maybe get around fall camp and hasn't seen some big scrimmages from them, then my concern will start to rise a little bit.
Now, with that being said, I did get some feedback that this team overall looks good from a speed perspective. And I think it's worth noting, Brew McCoy out, you bring in a couple guys like Mike Matthews and Braylon Staley, it does seem like the speed overall could go up a notch. Of course, you lose Dylan Sampson at the same time, so still some negative with that. A guy I wanted to mention, just because we were curious what they would get out of him in the scrimmage, Boo Carter. He was still a starter on defense, playing at the star position, but we wondered how much will we see him on offense. From what I've gathered so far, a little bit. It was kind of what we thought it might be. Again, that's the kind of thing we'll see how much his offensive package grows, but definitely a situation where it looks like a specialty package right now, and maybe not something that you're going to see. Not going to see him play 20 or 30 snaps a game. Are you surprised to hear that that's maybe what it's looking like so far? And that obviously if it's something we're only seeing a little bit right now, you wonder, will it even persist into the fall?
Yeah, not necessarily surprised per se, because most of the time it is just a specialty package. Specialty packages work great to get special guys the ball in their hands when it calls for it. However, is it actually going to materialize in the fall? Maybe, maybe not. To see him running a handful of them in the spring is promising to say that they'll probably carry something like that into the fall. But I think right now where it's at is in the design and testing phase.
Yeah.
And so they're kind of trying to design the way that the looks that they want to get for them, and then testing it out in the spring. I think in the summertime they'll really come together, kind of figure out, all right, does this work? Does it not work? What works best for it? And in the fall, you're going to see a full, complete plan that might have a high feature of Boo Carter on the offense.
A couple more guys I wanted to mention here from the scrimmage. A guy that stood out a little bit on defense, it sounds like, Joshua Josephs. We aren't surprised to hear good things about him. Obviously, high expectations. He was one of the top graded edge guys in the conference, in the nation, not just in the conference last year. So Tennessee had high expectations for him stepping in for James Pierce. But for one scrimmage, even though it doesn't sound like the offensive line struggled by any means from a pass protection standpoint, to hear some good things about him is encouraging, because you're obviously filling some big shoes there with James Pierce gone.
Yeah, and I've already said it. I think that Josh Josephs is going to take over all the weight that was on James Pierce and be able to handle that position very well. Super talented guy, and this continues to just show how much he continues to improve and develop even later into his career.
Yep. And on offense, a guy that sounds like had a pretty good night overall. We don't, of course, know the stats, how many big runs runs. Didn't hear of him having any touchdowns, but it sounds like Desean Bishop ran pretty well, and that continues. It's kind of been a widely held belief, I think, that he's going to be the starting running back in all likelihood, maybe the head of a committee as opposed to kind of a workhorse guy like Dylan Sampson was last year. But still pretty encouraging that Desean Bishop, a guy that we saw struggle a little bit against Ohio State at the end of the season, but had some really big flashes throughout most of last year, has continued to build on that and had a good first scrimmage for this offense.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a Desean Bishop fan, and I mean, first and foremost, I mean, he's a Knoxville native. Love the fact that he gives back to his university and plays hard every day. But also, I think he's continuing to make the name for himself that he is the #1 back that we're going to feature this year. But they're all doing fairly well and progressing well. I would not be surprised if this back situation, like you said, becomes more of a trio of guys rotating in and out than it does your actual workhorse guy. But I think if there is going to be a workhorse guy, Desean Bishop's kind of made that claim that he will be the workhorse if it's needed.
And I was curious your thoughts on this, just overall. Can we take much out of a first scrimmage, and how much can change from scrimmage 1 to scrimmage 2? Do you see a big jump? Usually, does it go defense kind of dominates the first one, offense tends to bounce back to the second one? Is that often how it goes, you think?
Yeah, I'd say most often that's how the scrimmages go. The first scrimmage, you can't take much from it offensively-wise, just from my own experience, just because you're not always getting the looks that you want. You can't set up anything perfect because we're not going to play against our defense. And so we're not going to get the perfect looks. Defense isn't going to get the perfect looks that they need. You're not going to get your tempo running at full speed because you don't want your defense to be out of tune with you because they're also needing to get that work as well. So, I mean, there's some give and take. You'll see a large progression gap between scrimmage 1 and scrimmage 2 just because there's more time. You get to break it down, see what happened in that scrimmage setting, and then figure out some stuff. The second one's a little bit more serious in terms of like getting things done versus just getting a look at it.
Right.
And so that second one kind of brings in the focus a little bit and like, all right, this is what we need to get done in the scrimmage. Whereas the first one is just, let's open it up a little bit, let's see what we got, and move on from there.
Yep. And that second scrimmage will be held Monday morning inside Neyland Stadium, so we'll be back here to break that down as well next week. And that'll be kind of the final tune-up before the orange and white game to wrap up spring practice on April 12th at Neyland Stadium. We're going to get into some depth chart talk as we've done each week, and this week we're going to talk about the tight ends. And this is, I think, a timely discussion because we learned recently, of course, that Miles Kitselman, the starting tight end, senior who got to come back because of the NCAA's being forced to allow junior college players to have an extra year of eligibility because of a court ruling. So it comes back. It's a big deal for Tennessee to get a guy like that back who had a surprisingly strong year last year and now undergoes surgery to repair a torn pectoral or some sort of tear in his pectoral. So don't know exactly the timeline for his return, but it sounds like something that could endanger the start of the season for him. So about a 6-month recovery a lot of times on those types of injuries. So he's obviously at the top of the depth chart, but they didn't have him in last night's scrimmage and won't have him for the rest of the spring. So thought it'd be a good time to discuss what they have behind him and what it might look like if he is forced to miss some time. And I think we'll start with Ethan Davis, kind of by default, but also he's had a nice offseason so far, it sounds like. Third year in the program, has had some injury troubles from high school in his first year on campus, developing as a blocker still, but sounds like he's made some progress, and obviously a guy they're going to need to count on this year in a pretty big way if Kitselman misses any time.
I mean, I think he is definitely the best athlete in that tight end room as far as being a receiver and being able to make plays in the field. However, his blocking is still developing. I mean, I've seen him throughout a 3-year span. I mean, he's put on weight, put on muscle. He's looking more and more of the part of an SEC tight end for sure. And I'm not worried about ever using him in routes and stuff because he's going to be great. He's a great athlete. However, the blocking is what we typically use the tight ends for most of the time, and especially with bringing in a new tackle, going to need to have some help on that offensive line from your tight end position. So it's going to be imperative that he continues to push that development, get the sense of blocking down, get his techniques down and everything. So he's 100% good to go. Because it's a big position, and a big need of that position is blocking. That's how we use them primarily. Yep. And it's great to get him out in routes, and he's going to do great when we get him out in routes, but that's just not going to happen as often as blocking will happen. So
I think you got to find ways to get him the ball, but yeah, to your point, that's how they've used tight ends to this point, and you're going to need that help in the run game. Behind him, there's not really a clear-cut number 2 right now. This raises the question, will we see as much 12 personnel as we saw them run last year? If Kitselman is out to open the year, will they stick to mostly one tight end as much as possible? But one of the talented guys they like behind him, Desean, a true freshman, The other guy that I think could challenge for that number 2 job if Kitselman is out would be Cole Harrison, a second-year guy, redshirt freshman. He's been banged up to start spring practice, so we've seen him in a yellow or red jersey a lot. And then the other guy in that conversation would be another true freshman, Jack Van Dorselaer. So those are the other scholarship options. As you can see, freshman, and redshirt freshman. A lot of inexperience at that position. So if Tennessee, they got some time to feel it out. If they don't love what they've seen behind Ethan Davis, could they consider going to the transfer portal if they're worried enough about whether Miles Kitselman's available to start the year? It's an interesting position. How much are you worried about that, seeing that kind of laid out with those 5 scholarship guys?
I mean, it definitely raises the worry a little bit. However, still got time.
Yeah.
Still got plenty of time before the season comes around. So, I mean, don't jump to conclusions yet and worry too much about what this tight end room is going to look like, because they've got time. They can get in the transfer portal if they need to get somebody. However, I mean, they got a lot of promising talent behind them, and a lot of guys that are young but could show strides of development and get into a position to where they're ready to go and play on Saturdays. I think, to your point, as far as the 12 personnel, I feel like at this point probably going to step away from that a little bit and just focus more on your 11 personnel, just because the fact is you don't have the bodies to do it. I mean, if you go in there and you get another tight end hurt, well, now your position group's looking really, really thin compared to what it was at the start.
Yep.
So you've got to be careful when you're playing in those realms, and especially you want to make sure if you're going in 12 personnel, it's for a reason, that these guys can actually go in there and make some blocks and some big things happen for us. And if you don't have that true blocking tight ends set up, then 12 personnel is almost wasting your time a little bit. You'd rather run 11, have one that you can sometimes consistently block, but I can get them out in a route if I need to, give or take. So, I mean, at the end of the day, some worry. However, still got time. You can breathe a little bit easy, but maybe start focusing on it a little bit more as the summer goes on, and then reassess at fall and decide, all right, what is the game plan here?
No doubt. Well, we're more than halfway through spring practice. First scrimmage officially in the books. Second one on the way next week. And about 5-6 practices left before Tennessee wraps things up with the orange and white game on April 12th. So we'll be back here next week with plenty more to discuss, including another scrimmage for Ollie Lane. I'm Ryan Callahan. We'll be back here next week on the Sports Source Digital Network.